There are a lot of competitively viable decks in Duel Links that don't see a lot of play, and in this video I'll talk about some of them. I reached King of Games with some of these decks, and used some of them in Ranked or KC Cup Stage 1 for casual grinding. Note that they are not placed in any order and the sequence I put them in is completely random. I really don't understand why these decks rarely see any play at all. They aren't as good as the top tier decks, but I think they deserve to be played much more. TG is way too underused for how consistent it is. It is a cheap synchro-based deck that practically never bricks because of a broken skill that still hasn't been nerfed since its release, Flight Control. This skill lets you exchange your TG monsters in your hand to any TG monster you like, so you can hardly ever brick with a deck full of TG monsters. It is not as powerful as other meta decks, and can be countered fairly easily by a single Book of Moon. But this deck is just so extremely consistent that it makes up for any other flaw it has. I use TG a lot in Ranked and the KC Cup for consistent ranked climbing, and reached King of Games with it twice this year. Another super consistent deck that doesn't see play is Balance Goki. Goki decks are very toxic in Duel Links because of how many back row they run, similar to trap-based Shiranui decks. I still don't understand why most Goki players use the tie that binds skill instead of balance, because Goki decks that use balance have a 100% chance of opening with a good starting hand, with a guarantee of at least one monster and 2 back row every single time. It's a trap-heavy deck that never bricks, and a deck that can swap out tech cards depending on the meta. For example, they could run Necro Valley without a problem if the meta favors it. If pendulum decks are becoming popular, they could run more floodgate trap holes and bottomless trap holes. They could play Chalice, Fiendish Chain, and Breakthrough skill to counter Chaos Dragon Levianeer. Basically they can swap in whatever card that counters the meta the best while still being more consistent than every other meta deck. Balance Goki counters aggressive combo decks like Andorra the best, and generally has a harder time dealing with decks that spam high attack monsters like Blue Eyes and DDD. Resonators were one of the most consistent meta decks in the past, but no one plays them anymore after their skill was nerfed. I still think Resonators deserve more love, because their skill is still very good at boosting their consistency. Resonator decks have plenty of room for back row, can set up a turn 1 board with a monster negate, and still have an excellent guaranteed follow-up play thanks to the graveyard effect of Wandering King Whirlwind and using the skill to search Red Strider, which weirdly enough nobody uses. If you are looking for the most aggressive deck in the entirety of Duel Links, that is not Gandorra or Thunder Dragons, Lightsworn is a great choice. They can essentially mill your entire deck and use your monsters in the graveyard as a resource, spamming your board with threat after threat, and can become even more aggressive than decks like Gandorra. Consistency is the main problem of the deck, but once you get your Lightsworn engine rolling, you are basically unstoppable. Even if you go first, having a copy of Stega Cyber in your graveyard essentially guarantees a turn of survival. Finally, for a deck that can make threatening boards regardless of going first or second, we have the old meta deck, Blackwings. For turn 1, Evil Swarm Nightmare with Ancient Fairy Dragon searching Necro Valley is enough to shut a lot of decks down. For turn 2, Rake Eerie can break boards and Onimaru can swing with a massive 6,000 attack points. Blackwings suffer from a tiny bit of inconsistency, but the deck is very well rounded in nature even as an aggressive deck and can still do really well when going first. Anyway, thanks for watching, goodbye.